Stay tuned for another episode of The Train Show.
Hi, I'm Art Fahie. This is Bar Mills, Maine. We're about 20 minutes outside of Portland. And this is the home of the Niagara and Pearl Creek Railroad. Some of you may know me from some of the articles I've done in N-Scale Railroading, N-Scale Magazine, and Model Railroading Magazine. What we're going to do today is take a look at the layout. It's an N-Scale layout. I used to live on Long Island. 3 years ago we moved up to Bar Mills here. And I used to be a member of the Long Island Model Railroad Engineers. And that's how I started in N-Scale with an N-track module as a member of that club. So if you want to take a few minutes and join me in the next room, we'll take a look at the Niagara and Pearl Creek Railroad. This basement is the home of the Niagara and Pearl Creek Railroad. One thing I missed when I moved away from Long Island was my room, because the room has such an important visual feel, a visual effect for the layout. I use vinyl, actually linoleum for the walls. I use stencils by New London Cloud Industries to spray with white flat paint over a sky blue background. I use fascia that's made out of masonite, 1 foot deep. Well, 4x8 will yield 32 linear feet of the fascia. I painted it basically gray with a SP bloody nose kind of a scheme, using vinyl tape to supply the stripe. The ceiling is just under 8 foot long, 8 foot tall, pardon me. And you'll see the lighting. We use 3 kinds of lighting in the Niagara and Pearl Creek. The main lighting is bar lighting. We have almost 100 lights in the layout. Secondary lighting is actually mounted on the back side of the fascia. And this is actually a C7 Christmas bulb. And what we do is we skip every other socket and put 25-watt spotlights in place of what would normally be an outside Christmas bulb. The third part of the lighting is probably the most important. What I've done is I've taken regular fluorescent tubing, covered them with blue tubes similar to what they use in a food establishment to make sure that if there was a breakage, none of the glass would get into somebody's food. And I've mounted them constantly around the whole back of the layout, so the sky lights up even when the main room lights are off. If you'll notice, there are not 1 but 3 banks of switches. The main dimmer is a 1500-watt dimmer, and that's for the main track lighting. The secondary is for the background lighting that lights the background, and these 2 switches here, one is for an air conditioner for the room, and the other one is to actually turn on the fluorescents that surround the room under the skyboards. Up on top, this is simply a $29 stereo. It's a Garrard. You get it at any cheap store. It has a built-in cassette deck, and it lets me play background railroad sounds when folks come in. Kind of adds a little ambiance. Well, we have along this wall, this is just some wainscoting that we got from Home Depot, and we use some vinyl graphics. I happen to own a sign shop, so it made it quite convenient to do this. And of course it says the Niagara and Pearl Creek Railroad. Basically the railroad is made up of modules. I got the idea simply by extending what I had started to do with the N-track modules when I first started in 1992. Now the railroad's actually taken about 6 years to get to this point. The room size is 11 foot wide by 28 foot long. 26 foot of it is exposed. The last 2 feet of it actually wraps around the back of the skyboard where you don't see it, and it enables trains to disappear through a city scene, disappear behind a skyboard, travel to the left in this case around the skyboard, and it can be monitored on this small television monitor up here, and exit on this side of the room. What I try not to do with the layout is show a lot of curves, because typically curves give up the scale of what you're doing. No train, regardless of the size of the radius, very few trains look at home or prototypical on typical model railroad curves. So I've hit in almost every curve on the layout. What we're looking at now is an area that's going to be called Rigby. Rigby is actually the name of a railroad yard here in Portland, Maine. And you understand that the Niagara and Pearl Creek is really based on the New York Central, more specifically towards the Great Lakes region of upstate New York. Of course, living on Long Island all my life, I was comfortable with New York Central equipment, and I particularly liked the lightning strikes. What happened here was, when we moved up to Maine, we had to change the whole layout of the track plan, and we added this whole peninsula. We named this Rigby simply because of the yard of the same name in Portland. You can see it's not done yet. We use plywood construction, Envirotex for water. Most of the structures are either scratch-built or craftsman kits. This happens to come from Republic Locomotive Works. All 3 of these buildings do. And we use, here again, we use masonite hardboard in the back. and basically it helps act to block the light so visually you don't see the fluorescent tubes that lie behind them. So this is the area going to be known as Rigby. As we pan around to what would be your right, we see a more finished area. Now, I'm very heavy into details. If you've ever seen any of my articles, you know I basically detail more like a large-scale railroad, or at least an HO railroader, than like an N-scale one. And I pay attention to little things like tires, like pallets, like figures, even handmade fences, and even birds flying above the water. By the way, these birds here are simply pieces of styrene that I cut out into the shape of a bird. Then I went out and I purchased a brush for scrubbing a grill, for a barbecue grill, and I used the bristles glued into the styrene, poked it into the Envirotex, and we have flying birds. Here is the ice house that was put up by Walter's Cornerstone. This is actually two kits. It was important that we kept icing platforms along the main line, because typically that's how reefers would ice up. But in this case, I wanted an excuse to run a couple spurs, so I added a couple of more platforms onto a couple spurs here, running right next to the waterfront area. Now, just because it's plastic does not mean that you can't treat it like a Craftsman kit. I use an airbrush quite a bit, and of course I make my own signs. But if you look at this, basically, I've approached it more in a Craftsman-like manner and made sure that I did not leave anything that was the original manufacturer raw look of plastic that came with the kit from Walters. Walters makes great product. It's just a matter of approaching the product and the way you're building it in a very Craftsman-like attitude. And you can find that this kind of plastic product can fit well even with the finest model railroads in the country. As we move farther to the right, you'll see in the background here, if I can have Rich focus back here, you see these very, very fine trees. This is a different kind of a tree line than we have in the rest of the railroad. These are actually weeds that I find growing along the road up here in Maine. And what I do is I simply airbrush them a little bit to bring back some green to them. And basically, even though you might think of a tree being brown, I use a thin wash of white and I paint the trunks, because what happens with a brown trunk, you simply lose it, you don't pick it up visually, whereas with a white trunk it stands out on its own. Basically, Woodland Scenics ground foam is used on ground covering, but none of my trees are Woodland Scenics, only one or two of them. Basically, I use all natural materials for making trees themselves, and of course you couldn't get any less expensive than going along the side of a road in a ditch and picking up these things come the fall. As we head down the tracks, we leave Rigby behind and come to the uncompleted section of a town that will be known as Eleanor. Now, it's tongue-in-cheek, but there is a Rigby yard in Portland, Maine, and I do love Maine, so I named it after Portland, regardless of my New York Central affiliation. And of course, Eleanor, simply because it works so well with the Rigby yard, and being a Beatle fan, the train that would run between these two destinations would simply be referred to as the Eleanor Rigby Switcher. Don't hurt yourself laughing when you hear that. By the way, sometimes you can do unusual things with the hobby. This here is an actual ceramic building that, if you look at the bottom, it's the San Diego Railroad station put up by the Danbury Mint. This was a station that I picked up at a yard sale, and at about $20, it happens not only to be an N scale, but to be a very unique structure. I'll weather this, add figures, details, vehicles, and you won't be able to tell without a very close look that it's not really some kind of a custom scratch built kind of a structure. The Eleanor yard on this end of the layout actually disappears through the backdrop into an area that circles around the railroad room and emerges in the town of 30 Mile Point. And what happens here, this is linoleum, it's coved at the corners, but it's not a matter of my doing anything special to have that happen. Linoleum relaxes in its own very special fashion. So if you use linoleum, you'll see there'll be little or no labor in actually getting this nice smooth transitionary effect to your layout. As the train leaves the town of Eleanor, it circles around the back of the layout, behind the skyboard, and comes out in a place called 30 Mile Point. Now, 30 Mile Point actually exists on one of the Great Lakes in upstate New York, although I'm positive it looks nothing like this. We just thought it was a really cool name, and it sounded like something that would conjure up all kinds of railroad images when I built the city. Now, if you'll notice, we have not one, but three tracks coming out of the area of 30 Mile Point. This is actually N-track spacing, because at one point, the Niagara and Pearl Creek actually started as an N-track regulation module. What we see here is this whole area here comes out in an L shape. We have a city line, we have the three tracks, we have wooden buildings as well as plastic ones, and of course we have a lot of detail from roof details and billboards right down to lumber piles, vehicles, and various other smaller things that really help a railroad come to life. Now, one of my favorite things to do is paint and place GHQ vehicles on the layout. Now, these are not the least expensive vehicles to buy, but they paint it beautifully, and they're a great alternative to some of the more commercial kits that you can just pick up in any KB kind of a hobby shop. If you're looking to save money, you don't want to buy GHQ, but if you're looking for some very, very good quality, it's certainly a good company you can depend upon. This group of 7 buildings in the back was actually the first thing I ever built in N-Scale. I was living in a house trailer at the time. I used to be on the road working in the carnival circuit, and I had done HO scale when I was much younger. I purchased one of these structures by DPM, and I kind of held off because I thought they were kind of small to work with. But eventually I worked it out, and I actually built the small diorama, which eventually became integrated into what is now the Niagara and Pearl Creek Railroad. A little surprise for some of you. Did you see a building like the Lawson Foundry? It's a kind of a unique structure. And if you don't recognize it from being a commercial kit, it's not that it's not a commercial kit, it's just that it's not a commercial N-scale kit. That's an HO scale building. Hiding and disguising the doors and windows, putting overhangs, building up loading docks, and various other little details make it work very well for N-scale. We do that quite a bit here on the Niagara and Pearl Creek. What we're looking at here is actually a commercial kit put out by Atlas. It's their classic switching tower that came out many, many years ago. Of course, it came out in N-scale about 3 years ago. What I wanted to do here was get a more of a New England type effect. I actually did an article on this particular project in N-scale magazine a couple years back by simply changing the roof line and using paper shingles and changing the shape of the building and adding a porch. I was able to take here again, it's just an inexpensive $10, $12 commercial building and turn it into something a little bit more notable. What we're looking at here is the upper level of the Niagara and Pearl Creek Railroad. Now, the Long Island Model Railroad engineers chose to have a 4th track for their N-track system. It was called the Mountain Division. It actually runs 3 1/8 inches above the regular 0 elevation on N-track. What I've done here is I've used the upper division, or the Mountain Division, as a separate branch line for the whole Niagara and Pearl Creek Railroad. The upper division is actually called the Niagara Division on this layout, and it runs point to point. Not interchanging, but at one point with the lower division of the mainline New York Central layout. The trees on the layout are all natural armatures. Most of them were gotten at craft stores like Frank's Nursery, and of course I painted the armatures and did a little bit of spray painting with floral paints, basically using hunter green, sprayed very lightly over the natural color of the what is referred to as ivory lace if you go into the local nursery store and ask for it. The viaduct you're looking at is actually a wooden kit. It's a laser cut kit by N-Scale Architect. Now this is the basic kit with an extension kit that I received with the original kit as well. This was not an easy kit to put together, but it yielded what I thought were really, really terrific results. I have about 20 to 30 hours building this one structure. It actually replaced a bridge that I had originally had on the layout. That was a simple girder deck design. This is much more of a New England feel, and the prototype actually exists, to the best of my knowledge, in some place in New Jersey. This was one of the first scenes I did on the layout. It gave me a chance to fool around and learn some details. A lot of people think you have to have a big railroad to really enjoy model railroading. Well, you'll see that, at least on this railroad, most of the railroad was built at my workbench, 1 square foot at a time, and then placed in on the actual physical work top of the layout, and blended in with scenery around any given structure. What we're looking at here is an area called Pumpkin Hill, and it's comprised largely of commercial kits, from plastic ones like the GTW Station by Sylvan to the kit bash versions of the wooden kits by Period Miniatures, for instance. One thing I've done on the layout is I've tried all kinds of different ways to make mountains, anything from using wire to building it up with paper to various methods just to try different ways of achieving the same effect. And a third effect would be to build up mountains actually out of pink foam that you'd use for insulating purposes. That's why all the mountains kind of have a different feel to them, because frankly, when I went from one mountain to another, I didn't know exactly how it was going to come out. But it's the erratic kind of effect that really makes the railroad more visually interesting. By the way, the track that we use on the Niagara and Pearl Creek is all micro engineering. It's code 70, it's painted and ballasted with Woodland Scenics ballast. Now I use fine ballast and I use gray, and after the ballast is down, what I'll generally do is apply some chalks or possibly do a little airbrushing to blend the ballast in to the surrounding area. The switches are Pico, they're all manually thrown, and we don't have any switch machines, and as a result no wiring to contend with here on the Niagara and Pearl Creek. Alright, what we're looking at here is on the Niagara division of the layout, the elevated division. The engine house was actually scratch built from a Rob Corriston article in RMC, or Model Railroad, many years ago. It's one of my first attempts at scratch building, but like any good scratch builder, I was wise enough not to actually add any detail to the back of the building. As a matter of fact, the back of the building is nothing but regular pieces of cardstock, but of course you don't see it, and I'd appreciate it if you don't tell anyone. As far as the turntable goes, it's a Pico turntable. It's not powered, doesn't even work, but it looks awfully good, especially when you have an old switcher like that frankly I picked up at a garage sale for about 25 cents. It makes a great looking little locomotive though, and photographs it very nicely if you just want to have an interesting scene for the visitors. This is another example of what you can do using plastic. This is actually a Walder's Cornerstone trestle. It's been out for several years. What I did with this is I sprayed everything gray with primer. Then I went back and I used a wash, like a stain over the primer, and it actually looks like wood. Now what I did do to make it wood actually was I hand laid individual ties along the top and then glued down some of the rail that was a stock rail for the Microengineering Code 70 that the rest of the layout uses. This area here is actually the newest section of the layout as far as the construction of the actual thing goes. Now I'm not referring to the bench work or the track work, because that always has to go in first, but I am referring to the concept and the scenery that surrounds the concept. This is a city called Amherst. Now the real Amherst is located upstate New York, just like 30 Mile Point is. We try to here again model the upstate Niagara region of New York State. This is an area that's roughly 6 feet long and about 3 to 4 feet wide, and consists of actually almost 50 buildings. Now a lot of the buildings of course are only fronts. They don't have any details on the back. Many of them I've scratch built, many of them I simply cast out of RTV, and using the RTV in different forms I've been able to stack wall sections that I've cast from originals, or actually even bend a wall section like I've done here while the RTV was still soft before it cured. At any rate, this part of the layout was featured in Model Railroading magazine not too long ago. The concept was you were supposed to look at the photos of this area of Amherst and guess what the original buildings were that were rearranged and kit-bashed to form what you're seeing now. It's a very important thing to realize that, especially in N scale, there are not many buildings commercially available that are of any really large size, and a lot of us, myself included, like large buildings. So how do you go about getting them? Use commercial kits, be creative, stack them, reproduce them, do what you have to do, but don't let the lack of commercial structures stifle your modeling creativity. What we're looking at here is actually a Keebri factory that I've kind of kit bashed and changed the shape around a little bit. It's kind of an expensive kit, and I'm kind of a cheapskate, so what I tend to do is hoard different wall sections for different uses around the whole layout. You can see there's a siding right in front of the whole shenanigans, but if you look, there's also a building in back that has a similar window pattern to the windows in front. That's because this building, when you turn it around, actually has no back. Much of the Niagara and Pearl Creek is exactly like that. There's only details in the front. Most buildings are also glued down. In this case, this building was not glued down because if you were to pick up the building, you can see there's a switch. And if something should happen to go wrong with that switch, that it might have to be tuned up or accessed for electronic problems, this building, by being removed, would allow easy access to that specific part of the layout. It's one of the little secrets that is all part of the Niagara and Pearl Creek system. What we're looking at here is the front edge of the layout. Now I did an article in N Scale magazine about 2 years ago on a specific technique that I use. If you notice, the layout rolls down and doesn't end on the edge of a table as might be typically expected on a model railroad. What I've done is I've taken a small piece of furring strip, screwed it in to the front fascia panel. By the way, I use 1x8 pine along the whole outside edge of the layout. And because I have this fascia coming out and slightly depressed from the regular edge of the layout, I'm able to introduce small hills, foliage, even extend roads out to the end. Now you might wonder why this is something that you'd want to do, but the answer is very simple. If you ever photograph your layout, you find that it's very difficult to shoot on an exact edge of a layout and get realistic and convincing photos. Also, if you wanted to, you could do like we did over to the left slightly with the small engine repair, because here again, the fascia board on the bottom, the little bit of a lip, helped me to reduce this building, and it had a basement floor where there was none. This area here shows actual construction of how the seam was completed. If you look slightly to your right, you'll see the plywood, you'll see the original 1x8, and you'll see the piece of wood that we've screwed onto the edge of the layout. Building up a contour with a little bit of sculptor mold, adding some color, some ground foam to it, and possibly some local sand or earth, we're able to press in some small hydrocal castings, add some ground foam, and achieve this effect where normally the railroad would simply end, similar to the effect just to the left of the scene we just saw. Now this effect is scattered throughout the railroad. Not everything has a square end, not everything goes down. I just use it depending upon the scene and the effect I'm trying to get in any given area. Now, a lot of guys tend to use 3/4 inch plywood, 5/8 inch plywood. Actually, I tend to use only 1/4 inch plywood in the building of the whole layout. I really rely upon the 1x8s in the front, the 1x4s that support the plywood, and the 1x6s that are in the rear of the whole benchwork concept on the Niagara and Pearl Creek. If you notice here again, there is masonite used along the different levels to help define one level of track from another, and of course to help prevent any accidents with any trains possibly coming off the track and landing on the floor. This area here is going to be an unusual area because here there will be an elevated city, but this time instead of making the city out of mortar, as we did in Amherst, this city is going to be strictly made out of wood and clapboard buildings. Indeed, this area here is going to represent Mott Street down in New York City, and it's going to be basically Chinatown. A lot of red signs and yellow printing, and of course it'll all be in Chinese, and I'll have probably a couple thousand prize figures painted to look like the inhabitants of that part of New York City. Where I'm standing now is one of the many little alcoves that are built into the Niagara and Pearl Creek. The benchwork has an erotic feel to it, eclectic at the very least. The idea being that in this situation we have the domino yard. This yard is only 8 inches deep, but I've left almost 30 inches of operating space, so an operator can come in here, operate the yard without stepping into the main aisle space and possibly running into conflict with other operators that are running along the main line and have to walk along with their trains. The Niagara and Pearl Creek is run on a Digitrax chief system as DCC, and every engine that we have is all digitally encoded for operation purposes. This newest area of the layout will not be seen probably for another 4 or 5 years. One thing I like doing on the layout is varying the depth of the benchwork. The maximum depth on the whole layout is only 30 inches deep. Much of it, of course, is 24 inches, but we go down as little as 6 inches in depth. The idea being that the different depths present different modeling challenges, and of course when you're presented with different challenges, you come up with different solutions. The idea of the railroad is to really change from scene to scene, as I've said earlier in the tape. This area here will be a small industrial switching area. I've already started applying some of the paper backdrops that are commercially available. Of course, I've shrunk them down for N-scale use a little bit and been playing with them just a bit as well. This is a small building that the track ends in, and it's meant to be a storage and shipping building. But here again, this is another HO scale building that I've added some N-scale details to, covered up some of the windows with signs to hide the original scale of the building, and worked into what will eventually become, of course, an N-scale scene. This here is the switching area that will be known as Lackawanna. Here again, Lackawanna being an upstate town. As usual, you can see the trackage, while it's not ballasted at this point, is micro-engineering, or railcraft if you may, code 70 with Pico switches. The beauty of the Pico switches are, while they're not powered, they do have a positive snapping action, as you can see, and I would hope probably here. Eventually what we're going to do is make a very large industrial complex back here, and one of the kits I have in mind to do this, here again, is an HO scale building. It's the Walder's Brewery. These are wall sections from the brewery. They'll be scaled down for N scale, the brick detail is right, and it'll be changed somewhat, and it'll be a big false front building, and it'll actually be a large version of the Campbell Soup Factory. What we're using here is a Digitrax throttle. We actually use 5 handhelds on the layout, and we have not one but 3 separate systems to power the whole layout. Now, to be honest with you, at this point, only one system is lit. The other two are not, because the other two are not simply hooked up at this point. The idea being that any one system can handle 1/3 of the layout, and if there's a short or an electronic problem, it's easier to track down with multiple systems than with just one. What you're seeing is the train passing through the city of 30 Mile Point and going through the cloud sky backdrop that's made of linoleum. The westbound train will circle behind the linoleum wall, and we have a monitor up mounted against the ceiling that actually lets us see the track work in this case and the progress of the train as it circles behind the wall, so if there's a problem we can spot it. And the train now is all set to exit from behind the wall on its westbound trip through the area that we call Old Port. What we try to do is run our trains at somewhat of a prototype speed. We don't run them all that quickly at all. It takes about 6 minutes for a typical locomotive to encompass the whole Niagara and Pearl Creek layout. Well, the reason I'm standing here, this is actually not part of the railroad room, but part of the living part of the basement. And what I've done here is I've simply put some of the articles that I've written in the past up on the wall here. Now, all the articles have been written essentially in the last 4 years. Some of them you may actually recognize. The last one we're going to see is actually the first one I ever wrote, an article on the mudslide and avalanche, which was the Niagara and Pearl Creek before it changed into an eastern road. Originally it started out as a western railroad. It's been a lot of fun writing the articles, and try to keep in mind that if you have any kind of a digital camera or a regular 35mm camera, publications are always anxious for modelers to share their ideas. That's where they get the articles to write and publish. And I'm sure if you contacted any of them, they'd be more than happy to hear your thoughts. So contribute towards the hobby. Write a couple articles and have some fun and share the hobby with other guys. Well, I'd like to thank you all for visiting with us up here in Bar Mills, Maine, and visiting the home of the Niagara and Pearl Creek Railroad. From time to time, you'll see articles running in a few of the magazines, especially N-Scale related publications in regards to the goings-ons with the railroad. And of course, you can always visit our website that will be posted on the screen. Here again, thanks a lot for visiting the Niagara and Pearl Creek.